The war-torn planet of Zenthais was a place where time seemed to have lost its meaning. Once a thriving world, it had become a battleground between two forces: the humans, who had come from distant stars to claim a foothold, and the Vrix, a fierce alien race that sought to protect their homeland. The conflict had raged for years, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. But there was one human who had become a symbol of defiance, a symbol of resilience. His name was Captain Marcus Hawk. Marcus stood tall, even in the midst of chaos. His uniform was torn, his face bruised, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had fought in countless battles, and each one had taken a toll on his body and mind. His hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the rifle as if it were an extension of his very soul. The planet of Zenthais had tested him like no other, but he was not one to back down. He had been through too much to surrender now. His mission was clear: infiltrate the Vrix military stronghold, gather intelligence, and sabotage their weapons systems. It was a dangerous assignment, one that had claimed the lives of many good soldiers before him. But Marcus had a way of surviving where others failed. His tactics were unconventional, his strategy bold, and his will unshakable. The battle raged around him as he navigated the ruins of the once great city. The Vrix had turned it into a fortress, their sleek metallic structures rising from the ashes of human ingenuity. Explosions rocked the ground beneath his feet, and the sounds of gunfire echoed through the air. But Marcus moved through it all with a calm determination. His heart beat steady, his mind focused on the mission. He had been in worse situations before. It was only when he reached the heart of the Vrix stronghold that things began to go wrong. He had planted the charges, set the explosives, and was making his way back to the extraction point when the Vrix caught wind of his presence. He was ambushed, surrounded by alien soldiers who had learned to fear the name of Marcus Hawk. But there was no time for fear now. He fought back with everything he had, his movements precise and deadly. He killed without hesitation, his rifle blazing with each shot. The Vrix soldiers fell one by one, but they kept coming, a never-ending wave of alien soldiers determined to take him down. Marcus was getting tired. His wounds were beginning to weigh him down, but he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. The mission was too important. By the time he reached the extraction point, his body was a map of scars, each one telling a story of survival. His armor, once pristine and strong, was now battered and dented, its reflective surface marred by the marks of battle. The pilot of the extraction ship greeted him with a nod, but Marcus could see the concern in his eyes. There was no hiding the toll that the war had taken on him. They made it off the planet just as the Vrix stronghold exploded in the distance, a brilliant flash of light that lit up the sky. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his eyes closing for just a moment. The pain in his body was unbearable, but he didn't allow himself to rest. Not yet. There was still work to be done. The journey back to the human fleet was a quiet one. Marcus sat alone, staring out the window at the stars. The blackness of space stretched out before him, vast and empty, a reminder of the isolation he often felt. He had lost so much in this war: friends, comrades, and even pieces of himself. But he had never lost his sense of purpose. That was the one thing he still had left. When they arrived at the human flagship, Marcus was greeted by a small team of medics. They immediately began to tend to his wounds, but Marcus waved them off. He had been through worse. His wounds could wait. There were more important things to focus on. As he walked down the halls of the flagship, he was met with nods of respect from his fellow soldiers. They had all heard the stories of Marcus Hawk, the human warrior who had become a legend in the galaxy. But to Marcus, it was all just a distraction. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need fame. All he needed was to keep fighting. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as he made his way to the command center. The ship was eerily quiet. the crew going about their business with the efficiency of soldiers who had grown accustomed to the war. The walls were lined with monitors, each one displaying a different part of the galaxy. Marcus glanced at them as he passed, but his mind was elsewhere. He entered the command center and saluted the officer in charge. General Rios, a tall man with a grim expression, stood by a table covered in maps and data readouts. "Captain Hawk," General Rios said, his voice low. "The mission was a success, but we've received new intelligence. The Vrix are preparing for a counterattack." "They've massed their forces on a nearby moon," Marcus nodded. He had expected as much. The Vrix were relentless and they would never let a defeat go unpunished. "What's the plan?" he asked. "We need to strike first," General Rios replied. "We'll hit their supply lines and disrupt their communication network. It's our best chance to keep them off balance." Marcus listened intently, his mind already working through the strategy. He had fought the Vrix countless times, and he knew their tactics better than anyone. They were brutal, but they were predictable. If they could catch them off guard, they might just have a chance. "I'll gather my team," Marcus said, turning toward the door. "We'll be ready." The day after the briefing, Marcus found himself on the edge of the Vrix moon, preparing for what could be his final mission. His team, a mix of seasoned soldiers and a few fresh faces, were already assembling. They were ready to go, but there was something different about today. Marcus could feel it deep in his bones. Every mission, every battle had taken its toll on him, but this one felt heavier than the others. The stakes were higher. The Vrix had been pushed to their limits, and their next move would be decisive. The moon loomed ahead, its surface a barren landscape of jagged mountains and deep craters. The enemy had set up camp in the central region, near a series of ancient structures, relics from a long-dead civilization. It was the perfect place for a final stand. Marcus knew that the Vrix would fight with everything they had, but he also knew that he couldn't stop now. This war, this fight for survival, was bigger than just him. It was bigger than anyone on either side. As the dropship descended toward the moon's surface, Marcus looked out at the bleak horizon. The cold light of distant stars illuminated the dark landscape, casting long shadows over the wreckage below. The ship's engines hummed as they approached the landing zone, the sounds of the battle growing louder in the distance. The Vrix were already preparing for the attack, and Marcus could sense the tension building. He knew that the first strike would be crucial. The ship touched down with a low thud, and Marcus quickly disembarked, leading his team into the wilderness. They moved in silence, their boots crunching against the rocky ground. The air was thin, and the temperature was frigid, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was focused entirely on the mission. His wounds ached with each step, but he pushed them aside. There was no time to rest. Not now. Their objective was clear: destroy the Vrix's primary supply lines and disrupt their communication network. It would leave the enemy vulnerable, forcing them to regroup and rethink their strategy. Marcus had led many successful missions in the past, but this one felt different. The enemy was waiting for them, and they wouldn't make the same mistakes twice. The Vrix were smart and they were prepared. Marcus knew that their best chance was to strike fast and hard, before the Vrix could mount a proper defense. As they advanced toward the target, Marcus noticed that the Vrix were not behaving like they normally did. There were no patrols, no guards, and no sentries stationed at the usual choke points. It was eerily quiet, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He signaled to his team to hold back, then moved forward to scout ahead. He crept through the rocky terrain, his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning every shadow. The silence was deafening, and the further he went, the more he felt like he was walking into a trap. But he had no choice. The mission had to continue. They had come too far to back out now. As he reached the edge of the Vrix encampment, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. The alien queen, Queen Althea, stood at the center of the camp, her tall figure framed by the flickering light of a nearby fire. She was flanked by a handful of her elite warriors, her face expressionless as she surveyed the area. But what struck Marcus the most was the aura of power that surrounded her. It was as if the entire battlefield bent to her will. Marcus knew who she was. She was the leader of the Vierix forces, the one who had masterminded their invasion of human-held space. The queen was ruthless, cold, and calculating. She had no regard for human life, no sympathy for the people she had conquered. But as he watched her from the shadows, Marcus couldn't help but feel a strange sense of respect. She was powerful, yes, but she was also a leader, something that Marcus had always admired. The moment passed quickly, and Marcus refocused on the task at hand. He signaled to his team to move forward, and they began their assault. Explosives were set, weapons fired, and chaos erupted across the Vierix camp. The battle was fierce, but Marcus's team moved with precision, cutting through the enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. For every Vierix soldier that fell, two more would take their place. But Marcus and his team were relentless. They were the last hope for humanity, and they fought like it. As the battle raged on, Marcus found himself facing the Queen's elite warriors. These soldiers were different from the others, stronger, faster, and more dangerous. They were trained to fight like animals with no regard for their own safety, but Marcus had fought warriors like them before. He knew how to handle them. He engaged one of the warriors in hand-to-hand combat, their movements a blur as they exchanged blows. Marcus's body was already exhausted from the previous battles, but adrenaline kept him going. His fist connected with the Vierix warrior's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. But before Marcus could finish him off, another warrior appeared, this one armed with a deadly energy blade. Marcus barely had time to react as the blade slashed through the air, narrowly missing his side. Marcus's rifle was knocked from his hands, and he found himself once again face to face with the warrior. But this time, he didn't hesitate. He drew his combat knife, his movements fluid and precise as he parried the warrior's attacks. The fight was brutal, but Marcus was driven by one thing: survival. Finally, with one swift move, Marcus thrust his knife into the warrior's side, ending the fight. He stood over the fallen alien, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. But there was no time for victory. The battle was far from over, and Marcus had more work to do. His team had managed to destroy the Vierix's supply lines, but the Queen's forces were regrouping. The battle had shifted in their favor, but Marcus knew that it was only a matter of time before the Vierix launched a counterattack. He had to act fast. As the last of the Vierix warriors were taken down, Marcus made his way back to the heart of the camp. He was determined to finish what he had started, to ensure that the Vierix would never threaten humanity again. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't stop now, not after everything they had fought for. But just as he was about to issue the final command to retreat, something unexpected happened. He looked up, and there she was, Queen Althea, standing in the center of the battlefield, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch as her warriors fell around her, as if she were waiting for something. Marcus was taken aback. In all his years of combat, he had never seen an enemy leader so unmoved by the chaos around her. It was as if she had already accepted her fate, as if she had known this day would come. For a moment, time seemed to slow as Marcus and Queen Althea locked eyes. There was no animosity, no hatred, just an understanding. She had fought for her people just as Marcus had fought for his. She had lost, but she had never wavered in her resolve. And in that moment, Marcus realized something. The Vierix Queen wasn't just an enemy to be defeated. She was a symbol of the same resilience he had fought for all these years. They were both warriors, caught in a war that neither of them had chosen. They were both fighting for their people, for their future. Without a word, Marcus lowered his weapon. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. And as he looked at Queen Althea, He couldn't help but wonder what kind of future awaited them both. The battlefield had quieted down after the chaos of the last hours. The once loud sounds of gunfire and explosions had been replaced with the eerie silence that followed a battle's conclusion. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt metal and dust, and Marcus Hawk stood in the midst of it, his breath coming in heavy gasps. His uniform was torn, his body bruised and battered, but his mind was sharp. His team had accomplished their mission, destruction of the V-Rix's supply lines and communications network. The enemy had been dealt a significant blow, but the price had been steep. As Marcus surveyed the destruction around him, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The battlefield had been his home for so long now. He had fought and bled for this cause, had sacrificed parts of himself that he would never get back. But with every victory, every piece of ground claimed, he was reminded that this war wasn't just about winning battles, it was about survival. And survival came at a cost. His eyes drifted to the figure standing in the distance, still framed by the fading light of the battlefield. Queen Althea. She had not moved since the battle had ended. Her tall figure, cloaked in dark armor, stood as still as a statue, as if she were contemplating the weight of the war herself. Marcus had seen many leaders over the years, but none like her. The V-Rix queen had led her people with strength, with an unyielding will, but now, in the aftermath of defeat, there was a stillness about her, a quiet acknowledgement of the battle she had lost. She was a leader, but she was also a warrior, and that was something Marcus couldn't help but respect. The moment that had passed between them, when their eyes had locked in the midst of the battle, was still fresh in his mind. For the first time in years, Marcus felt as though he had encountered someone who truly understood the toll of war. Queen Althea had fought just as fiercely as he had, and though they had been enemies, there was an unspoken bond between them. They were both shaped by the same cruel forces, both products of a galaxy that demanded sacrifice. Marcus took a deep breath, adjusting the weight of his rifle as he turned to face his team. His soldiers were tending to the wounded, gathering supplies, and ensuring the perimeter was secure. It was clear that the battle was over, but the war was far from finished. He could already hear the V-Rix forces regrouping in the distance, preparing for a counterattack. There would be no rest for him or his team, but for now they had won. They had achieved the mission's objectives, and that was something to be proud of. "Captain," came a voice from behind him. It was Lieutenant Daniels, one of his most trusted soldiers. "We've finished securing the area. The extraction team is ready." Marcus nodded, giving the order to begin the withdrawal. His soldiers began to move out, and Marcus followed them, his mind still on Queen Althea. The V-Rix queen had not yet moved, but Marcus knew that it was only a matter of time before she would be forced to leave the battlefield, just as he was. She had no more soldiers to command here, no more warriors to lead into battle. The fight was over for her, for now. The extraction ship landed in the clearing, its engines whirring as the door opened. Marcus led his team on board, and they took off into the cold void of space. The familiar hum of the engines was a welcome sound, one that meant they were heading home. But even as the ship accelerated, Marcus couldn't shake the image of the Queen standing there, alone on the battlefield. He had faced many enemies in his time, but never one who had left such an impression on him. He had fought for his people, just as she had fought for hers, and in that sense they were more alike than he cared to admit. Days passed, and the fleet moved on to its next mission, but Marcus couldn't forget about Queen Althea. She had been defeated, yes, but there was something in her eyes that told him she was not one to be easily broken. The war was far from over, and he knew the V-Rix would regroup. They would fight again, and the stakes would only rise higher. But Marcus also knew that this battle, this moment, had shifted something in him. It was a small change, a flicker of doubt, but it was enough to make him question everything he had believed in. As he sat in his quarters, staring out at the endless stars, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the past. The war had taken so much from him. It had taken friends, comrades, and pieces of his soul. It had made him into a soldier, a weapon. But it had also made him something more. It had made him a leader, someone who could inspire others to follow him, to fight beside him, to die beside him. And yet, despite everything he had become, there was a part of him that still longed for something more, something beyond the endless battles, beyond the fighting. He longed for peace, for a life where he didn't have to be constantly on the move, constantly preparing for the next fight. But peace was a distant dream, a dream that felt impossible in a galaxy that was constantly at war. He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the stars once more. The vastness of space had always fascinated him. It was a place of endless possibility, a place where anything could happen. And yet, despite its beauty, space was also a place of isolation. It was a place where people lived and died by their own will. No one cared about you unless you had something to offer. The galaxy had no room for weakness, no room for compassion. And that was why Marcus had become who he was, a man who had learned to survive by any means necessary. But the thought of Queen Althea lingered in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her than just a ruthless enemy. She had fought for her people just as he had fought for his. She had led with strength just as he had. And in that moment on the battlefield, Marcus had seen something in her that he hadn't seen in any other enemy. It was respect. It was understanding. It was the recognition that they were not so different after all. Days turned into weeks, and the fleet moved deeper into Vric's territory. Marcus's mind remained preoccupied with the Queen, but his focus never wavered. His team relied on him to lead them, and he couldn't afford to let personal thoughts get in the way. The war was still going on, and every day brought new challenges, new dangers. He couldn't afford to get distracted, not when so many lives were on the line. But then one day, as Marcus stood in the command center, his communication device beeped. It was an encrypted message from an unknown source. He activated it, and the image that appeared on the screen took him by surprise. It was Queen Althea. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of defiance and something else, something deeper. For a moment, Marcus was speechless. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, not after everything that had happened. "Captain Hawk," the Queen's voice echoed through the speaker, calm and composed. "I know that you are a man of honor, a warrior, and I know that our paths have crossed in battle, but there is more to this conflict than just bloodshed. I am not asking for peace. I am asking for understanding." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. The Queen had always been a leader, a ruler who commanded her people with an iron fist. But now she was offering something else, something he had never expected from an enemy. "You are not my enemy, Captain Hawk," Queen Althea continued. "We are both fighting for something greater than ourselves, and I believe that, despite our differences, there is a way forward, a way that does not require more bloodshed." For a moment, Marcus didn't know how to respond. He had spent so much of his life fighting, so much of his time focused on survival, that he had never stopped to consider the possibility of a different way, a way where both sides could walk away from the conflict without further destruction. "I am willing to listen," Marcus said, his voice steady but unsure. "What do you propose?" Queen Althea's expression softened just slightly. "A truce," she said simply. "Not a surrender, but a truce. We can stop this war if only for a time. If only long enough to understand each other, to find a path that does not lead to destruction." Marcus paused. The weight of her words settled over him. Could it really be that simple? Could they find common ground? Could there be a way to stop the endless cycle of violence and death? "I will consider it," Marcus said, his voice firm. "But know this, Queen Althea, I will never abandon my people. I will never stop fighting for their survival. And if you betray that trust, I will stand against you." Queen Althea nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I would expect nothing less." With that, the transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The possibility of peace, of a truce, was a powerful thing. But it was also fragile. Could he trust the Queen? Could he trust the Vrix? Or was this just another trick, another manipulation to gain an advantage? As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new or the start of another war?